Let's talk now to Gustav Gressel, Senior Policy Fellow with the wider Europe program at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Nice to see you once again, Gustav. Good morning.
Good morning.
Gustav, of course, joins us from Brussels in Belgium. Let's start off with that last story we just aired, shall we? The issue of the grain exports, which is one of the developments that is having a worldwide effect as we speak. What do you think really, I mean, we understand that Russia is blockading the Black Sea, but then there have been attempts by the UN and Turkey, which Antony Blinken reinforced there, to get Russia in a kind of deal to allow the grain exports proceed. Why is that being held back, especially because Turkey had given the impression that if Russia's demand to be let out of some of the sanctions that had been imposed on it was met, then this was a done deal?
Yeah, that's actually the problem. So the Russians are trying to score, sort of to combine demands to the easing of the blockades that are quite untakeable for the Europeans, and that have nothing to do with grain situation themselves. So the problem is the grain can't come down because there's a naval blockade of the Black Sea ports, and the land transport ways are also partially bombed, and partially they have a very low capacity because of different GORG systems in the railway systems, fuel crisis for trucks, etc. If you would allow the international access to the freighters and have escorts and sort of clear some path through the minefields, you could export them. But the problem is the Russian Black Sea Fleet, of course, has means to attack that even clandestinely, so it would need to have an agreement on the route of the convoys, on the escort of the convoys, on the supervision. And here, sort of Russia says, I won't allow that unless you do me favors. And this is like you have a hostage taker that, of course, demands reward for freeing hostages, etc. And the other countries go like, if we start with Russia negotiating this way, they are very good hostage takers. They will just be encouraged to take the next hostage. That's roughly the situation at the moment.
Let's come to the wider diplomatic situation. It doesn't look as if there's emphasis on peace talks anymore. The battleground has shifted to eastern Ukraine, where Russia, even though slowly, is having more success militarily on the ground there. It's got Donetsk now, and then it is after Luhansk, and some of those I've spoken to indicate that sooner or later it will also get Luhansk. Now, if that is the case, does that leave Ukraine with any bargaining chips any longer, even though it continues to have the support of its Western allies militarily and otherwise?
So yes, for Russia at the moment, it looks that the way to victory is very slow and very bloody, but it's still a way to victory. For the Ukrainians, on the other hand, they can induce a lot of losses to the Russian side, and they have the backing of the West. That means weapons deliveries. And you can now, of course, make your bet who will run out of steam first, the Russian offensive, or will running out of steam because of increased weapon deliveries and increased lethality of the Ukrainian side, or will the Russians manage to do it? For the time being, the Russians think they can pull it through, and that although the support by the West to the Ukrainians is annoying and causes losses, they still can drive on to victory. The Ukrainians are quite confident that with new deliveries coming up, and the problem is only they and the Americans know some of the next delivery batches that are scheduled to come in the recent months, they can turn the tide of the war roughly in autumn.
Given that scenario and something else that happened over the weekend, the meeting between the Americans and the Chinese, who seem to be the silent player in all of this equation. China has made it clear that it is in a partnership with Russia, but as we've referenced, there's no clear evidence that they're actually offering Russia anything beyond rhetorical support, no military aid, no weapons, and so on. But is there the possibility that if it gets to the situation which you've just described, which is that Ukraine continues to get weapons deliveries and all of that, China might step in to also assist Russia?
I honestly don't think so. So the Chinese have been offered this role as a negotiator and an intermediate, but they have declined at numerous occasions. They see the war with great interest. It's a test bed of also military systems that they themselves employ. They also do not want to humiliate Putin and Russia in terms of contributing to what might be seen as a defeat of Russia. On the other hand, they don't want to clearly back the Russians beyond the rhetorical backing that they're doing now for the fear of secondary costs in other parts of the world. This is why they sort of try, at least in official rhetoric, to stay out of it as much as they can and rather support the Russians in, or to use the war in the kind of anti-American, anti-Western rhetoric that they put on for their own sake of interests. If there is a neutral intermediator between the two, I would rather think that Turkey might play that role, but I don't see any eagerness on the Chinese side to really do that. Also, if it's, for example, remember the negotiations about North Korea's nuclear program, China has not been a very outspoken negotiator. It has been a facilitator in terms of infrastructure and bringing people together, but it led to the Americans do the talk on the one side and the North Koreans on the other. Being a neutral peace mediator is not something that the Chinese foreign bureaucracy is very familiar with and what they perceive themselves as being their natural foreign policy role.
But do you think this could have anything to do with China's own designs and intentions, given the ripe environment over Taiwan, that they're looking at this as a possible dress rehearsal for if and when that might become necessary, because they've made it clear that should Taiwan attempt to declare independence formally, they will take it by force?
Yes, and I think that before the war, I mean, we all know that the Chinese have been informed by the Russians before the war. That was basically their outline and their look at the war. So they thought, and they were informed, of course, by the Russians, that this will be a short and successful campaign and Ukraine will fall in a couple of days, if not weeks. And they thought that, well, let the Russians do that, because this will induce a shock moment to the West, and the West, and especially the American self-confidence to defend other countries. Now, of course, going more than 4 months into the war and Kiev is not falling at all, things look very different. It's not the kind of shock moment for the West anymore. It did not expose too much Western weakness and indecisiveness. On the other hand, the Russian military, which was the role model for Chinese military in terms of military reforms, applying new technologies, then although the Chinese military technology-wise is more advanced, the Russians were able to try out things in Syria and in Ukraine, etc. All these military machinery now looks less bright and confident and effective, and that, of course, makes Beijing also look into their own machinery and ask themselves, well, what lessons do we have to learn and digest before challenging the West? Because if we want to do that, be it over Taiwan or over other elements of the 9-dash line, we need to make sure that we're going to be successful in this.
Indeed, indeed. That's another perspective that is and that will be interesting to watch. Gustav Gressel, thank you so much for your time and your perspective this morning from Brussels.